Well, we're going to try and get started. I know some other people will be joining us for this series. My name is Dr. Reginald Nichols. I'm the Director of Leadership Development in Yorktown, Nevada Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church. So I welcome you and thank you for joining us for this Wednesday webinar. As you know, all the webinars will be recorded and posted on the California, Nevada website, along with upcoming schedule, presenters, and topics. So we invite you to share the webinars with those in your community, and um, and also let us know how we're doing. You can always send an email to me or to Tua or to Selby, yeah, to let us know how this is going. During the month of October, we'll focus our webinars on a familiar passage of scripture that I talked about last week, the scripture in Luke chapter 10, verses 25 through 37, the parable of the Good Samaritan. In this era of social distancing, we can embrace healthy, government affirmed reasons to stay away from our neighbor. But the question still is, who is our neighbor? If they don't look like me or act like me or vote like me or not in my circle of friends, who are they? And how can I be a neighbor and follow Jesus' words to go and do likewise? One of the things we learned from the parable is that the Samaritan took action but didn't do it alone. So today we're going to talk about some action that we can take. How do we engage in worship, especially in this COVID moment? And so we're going to continue our fourth quarter webinar talking about some of those things. I'm going to introduce our guest in a little bit. But I want to remind you to look at the instant connection that comes out every Thursday. We will have our registration for our upcoming webinars in that instant connection on Thursday. Just a teaser, our webinar coming up for next Wednesday will be a wonderful webinar. We're finalizing all of the details about seeing a movie. We'll be giving you an opportunity to see a movie called Walking While Black. Love is the Answer. Is directed by AJ Ali, and he'll be joining us next week with a couple of people from the film. So please make sure that you get a chance to register for that webinar. It's going to talk about community policing and those types of things, and some things we can do to work together in our communities. And after that, we'll have a webinar on voting because the elections are coming up. I'm hoping everybody gets a chance to get out there and vote. We're going to have a webinar just to talk about how do we affirm our voice and still carry the mandate of caring for our neighbor, and how do we work through the day after the election. So make sure you join us for that. I think it'll be an exciting time. um, it is my joy to introduce to you um, someone I've gotten to know and enjoy, Dr. Marcia McFee, who is graciously agreed to join us on this webinar series, even though she is doing a lot, especially with the Reboot Your Worship workshop. Dr. Marcia McFee is an author, a worship designer, leader, professor, preacher, and artist. Her engaging interactive style has been called refreshing, inspiring, and unforgettable. She combines her background and experience in professional companies of music, theater, and dance with a variety of worship and preaching styles in order to bring a fresh experience of the gospel to each worship setting. She received a Master's of Theological Studies degree at St. Paul's School of Theology with a concentration in preaching and worship, um, where she also recently received the Outstanding Graduate Award from the Alumni Association. She earned a PhD in Liturgical Studies at the GTU, um, with an allied field of ethics. She's been a guest lecturer, adjunct faculty. Um, she's working at most recently, she designed and led 29 worship services over a 10-day period for the International Quadrennial General Conference of the United Methodist Church. I said she was busy. So, and she's at a faculty at San Francisco Theological Seminary. And we are so grateful to have her with us and joining with us today. So let's give a virtual round of applause to Dr. Marcia McFee. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's great to be here. I don't know where that bio came from, but it's a few years old because I recently
I
the
know.
last annual conference I did was 2012, which wasn't recently. So I don't know, but anyway, it's all true. It's all true, and it makes me tired whenever I hear it. So. But thank you for reading that bio.
Yeah.
Friends, I'm seeing familiar names here. We have been together at your annual conference. I've been around the Northern California area for a long time, including Truckee for many years, and now back in the Bay Area. So, I'm one of you, Cradle United Methodist, and just, so glad to be with you in this moment. And what a moment it is, my friends. What a moment it is. So shall I just launch right in, Reggie?
I think just launch right in. Yes,
Okay.
please. Yeah.
All right. Well, friends, here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about worship and what you all have been doing with worship, and maybe some things I've learned along the way in the last few months. One thing that wasn't in that bio because it was an older one is that my last book was called Think Like a Filmmaker. And I studied filmmaking and did interviews with filmmakers to see what they could tell me, help me understand about telling stories in ways that stick with you, right? Unforgettable messages. And it was a metaphor, it was an analogy, the filmmaking. But in the last few months, my friends, we've all become filmmakers, right? I mean, we've had to employ some of the actual techniques that filmmakers use to bring our story to a screen so that we might connect with people. And that's really, as I reflect on the story of who is my neighbor and connecting with neighbors, we have learned many things. Some of us have reconnected with people who moved away and now are worshiping with us because we're doing it online. Some of us are reconnecting with those who are homebound and could no longer come to our sanctuaries, but now they can. So, I mean, there's just many, many different ways that our neighborhood has changed in terms of how we worship and who we worship with. And so while this is a very challenging time and a devastating time, it's also a time for us to learn a lot about good ways to communicate that can include more people. And so I'm going to just take you on a little journey today about what I've been thinking about in terms of Advent, Christmas coming up, and really talk about what you want to talk about as well, because we're a small group here today, and if you have questions about techniques or about how do you deal with this or that, please feel free. Use the chat. I love when you use the chat a lot to make comments to each other. Do make sure that you've got all panelists and attendees in that drop-down menu so that you can be talking to each other as well. But I'd love for you to take to the chat right now and let me know what kind of worship, what format of worship have you been doing for the last few months? And it might have changed somewhat, but are you doing Zoom meetings where everybody is in real time on the screen? Are you doing pre-recorded that's uploaded to something like YouTube or Vimeo? Are you doing a live stream where you're doing, say, a Zoom like this, but you're live streaming it to Facebook or a YouTube live stream? Just take to the chat and let me know what formats you have been doing so that I can sort of get a sense of who we are on this webinar. Okay, pre-recorded videos, posting to Facebook and YouTube. All right. Live Zoom each Sunday. All right. Live streaming and then recorded on YouTube. Great. Live stream on Facebook for worship, Zoom for prayer meetings, Facebook live stream, outdoor worship the past 2 months. That's live streamed. Zoom, uploading to Facebook, Zoom fellowship afterwards. Yeah, so a combination of a lot of things, recorded, uploaded to YouTube, and daily email, weekly recorded audio, lots of ways to connect. Yes, finding all those different ways. Pre-recorded presentation posted to the web, to YouTube, Facebook, Zoom for meet and greet afterwards. Yeah, which is one of my favorite formats, is to do the pre-recorded and watch it live with the people who want to watch it at the hour of worship, but post it anytime for people to watch it anytime, and then a live fellowship in a Zoom format is a really nice. I mean, all of it is great. Not saying any one way is better than the other. The only way that is right is the one that's right for you. There's no one way to do this, and it's just extremely important for us to be doing things that actually are accessible to folks. Some folks are doing telephone conference calls for folks who don't do the computer. Some people are taking their worship scripts and they're creating hard copy devotionals to either mail or deliver. So again, there's no one right way. The right way is just to be able to find out how we need to connect in the different ways with our folks. So even distributed DVDs and flash drives. Yeah, great. So there's so many different ways. I'm going to share my screen with you here and show you a couple of things that I've been thinking about as Advent Christmas comes up for us. So one of the things that I want to do is to call your attention to the fact that your conference, through our esteemed moderator here, has signed you all up for free access to a series of webinars that I have been doing. We just did week 4's webinar yesterday called Reboot Your Worship Pandemic Edition. And Reboot Your Worship is something that I started years ago, and twice a year to get ready for Advent and to get ready for Lent. I do for my Worship Design Studio subscribers and for anyone else who wants to come on board. And this year I made it available to conferences. And so your conference has availed itself of it. Everything is recorded. So I'm going to go right ahead and show you here at the beginning of the call what you have available to you already, so that you know that and you can come back and watch that whenever. So you should be seeing the Worship Design Studio website right now. And what we have in here is just a lot of things. You can go to Discovery and there is a ton of things. I'll be talking about our caroling resource that we just created for everybody, a blue Christmas liturgy that could be used for All Saints. All this to say, I am posting resources like crazy. Now, when you come here, and there's a special link that you were sent by the conference, that is a conference link that you need to click on to get access. But when you get in here, you're going to go to resources, and then you will see Reboot Your Worship. If you see that you have to pay for it, it means you didn't click on that conference link. All right, so you shouldn't have to pay for it. You go right into Reboot Your Worship. And the 5 reboot basics are things that I came up with that could help you improve your worship right away without a big budget. Even if, no matter the size of your church, the size of your budget. And so in week 1, we talked about intentional spiritual journeys, that creating in series helps us with the economy of planning time. I don't want you to be any more burnt out than you already are. But it also creates a wonderful spiritual journey for the community. And week 2 was enhancing congregational participation. Tons of ideas for online worship and enhancing congregational participation in that one. Sensory rich communication was last week, and I went over top tips for every worship art to continue to be sensory rich, even as we're worshiping online. And then deeply spiritual leadership is what we talked about yesterday, and what we need to do and the practices we need to keep ourselves centered and being able to worship in the moment, even as we're leading online worship or just, talking into a camera and recording. So there's a lot of things there. And let me just say that in each one of these, you can watch, like I said, we record them all. So even though you might not have gotten on yet, you have access to all of this. So there's an introduction video. It's like 2 minutes, introduces you to what that topic is. And then the recording of the session that I do, which are each, depending on the session, hour, maybe a little more than an hour. But then there's a recording of me doing the content session. And then there's a lot of follow-up materials. And these are things you won't get to at all, and you don't need to get to it all, but you just want to scroll through. And there are different subjects that will interest you. And I just want to point out here, some of this is about learning some new skills, making logos or memes in Canva, which is a wonderful graphics art program, or making a series trailer and learning how to create and edit videos. If you could put in the chat right now, if you have learned some new skills in COVID time, what new skills have you learned and have you begun to utilize, whether that's video editing or graphic arts or preaching into a camera? What are those things that you have learned? And then in each week, I've had an action item that gets you closer to creating your Advent series. And so that's really the purpose, besides learning and education, and you can get CEUs for this, but also helping you every step of the way to create that Advent experience that's going to be amazing. So that's what Reboot is. I'm going to stop sharing, see if I've got some chat here. What new skills? Let's see. Anybody? iMovie, video editing, videography, Zoom, live streaming. Yes. How to create a new media team ministry. iMovie editing. Woot woot. Yes. Cool. Preaching into a camera, figuring out live stream worship, the Zoom platform. Keeping things concise, close up with smooth transitions. Amen. Yeah, that is, once you just get used to the technology, then you can start nuancing it and learning how to make those. Next week in Reboot, you can just hop on next week live if you want to, even if you haven't done the first few sessions. We're going to talk about flow and transitions. That's the 5th Reboot. The week after that is about what I call the politics of change. How do you make change without making anybody mad? Well, you don't. It's just going to happen, but how do you deal with it? So we're going to be talking about that next week. So yeah, these are great new skills that we've had to put together, right? So let me share with you then a little bit about what the thought process was as I began to discern what is the right thing for Advent Christmas. And many of you may have already decided what you're going to do, or maybe you're just now sort of thinking about what should we do. But across the board, the comment that people were saying to me early summer, midsummer, I cannot imagine Christmas without singing, right? And this continued to be the thing that people were saying. So I called up my dear friend Mark Miller, which many of you probably know of his work, use his work, amazing composer, musician, and longtime collaborator of mine. We did the 2008 General Conference together as co-directors. And I called him up and I said, Mark, what are we going to do about music and Advent Christmas? Because I'm getting this question. And this was the summer. And so I knew that probably most choirs are off during the summer. And so they weren't as cognizant of, or hurting as much as I knew when fall came back. And if we weren't back to normal, which we were far from it, it was a new level of depression, right? Of not going back to our choirs, not going back, no, we're not back in the sanctuary yet, that kind of thing. And so we decided that we would create something for Advent Christmas that instead of ignoring music because it was going to be difficult, that we would look straight at it. So instead of turning away from this moment in sorrow, we embrace it. And so what we created was a series called I Believe Even When, which is a one of his beautiful and most beloved anthems. It's been around for a while. It's been a bestseller at the Choristers Guild for a long time. But it's, let me just play this trailer because you'll get the sense of it. And I'm giving this to you as an example of how you might discern what's right, what is the message that we must proclaim in Advent Christmas in our community to help meet the needs of who we are and what we're feeling, what we're going through. So let's just take a look at this. So that is the series that we came up with. And so what we decided to focus on was the appreciation of the power of music in difficult times. And the ways that we can fill the night with music and light. It seems antithetical to what we can do in worship right now, and the constraints that we have, and yet we challenged ourselves to think about how could we celebrate the power of music and invite people to have music in their lives, but appreciate it in a different way, not just through the singing of it, but also through focusing on the stories of the music themselves. One of the things that I do in each one of the weeks is I did some research on carols of resistance, I call them. And I researched the history of Christmas carols and found one for every Sunday that has a story of resistance, right? So resistance to war, resistance to slavery, resistance to voter suppression. This little light of mine actually turns 100 this year, and it was used in the civil rights movement, as many of you may know, during protests around voter suppression. So how timely is that? So carols that were powerful witness in difficult times. Luminaria is what I call an anchor image, and when you have an anchor image, a metaphor or a symbol that can really anchor your message, filling the night with music and light, it becomes very participatory. And when you watch the Reboot Your Worship week 2, you're going to hear all kinds of congregational participation. And often it comes from having a really good visual that people can engage with. So in this case, luminaries, having people make luminaries, create luminaries, even creating a tradition at 7 o'clock every night during Advent to put those luminaries in the window or outside. Having luminaries, I'm going to show you some pictures of my ideas for Christmas Eve, a Christmas Eve pilgrimage, and with no-touch stations at your church. So these can be used in many, many different ways. For this series, I also created a small group study or individual studies based on documentaries that are all about music in times of difficulty and the role of music. Powerful, powerful documentaries. And so getting people to focus on the power of music, I think, will lessen their mournfulness around not being able to be together singing these things, because we're going to give it a different focus. So this is one of the ways that I've been thinking around how do we how do we just enhance what we're doing so much that people are swept up in the deep stories of it all? And so we've created lots of you know, materials for this. This is what I call my fully scripted worship series. And so I came up with ideas for Blue Christmas that would be outside, right? Do a Blue Christmas tree outside. I created a litany for that. That would be a brief worship for that, because it's going to be so important to mourn in the Advent Christmas season. And a Blue Christmas or longest night service is important. Christmas Eve, incorporating pilgrimages to the church for no-touch stational experiences. And I'm going to give you some ideas about that in just a moment. So handbells, looking at instruments that we can play without blowing air. Handbells could feature prominently in our worship, in our things. So let me just go on. There's a picture of handbells. I just popped that in this because I wanted to show you how we talked on the Get Ready webinar for this series about handbells. And Stephanie Rhodes is a handbell expert, and I had her on talking about safe ways to rehearse and play and even record your handbells. So let me get to my list here. My list of ways to, things to think about in terms of really connecting with people in a deep and meaningful way for Advent Christmas. Create your worships, what I call scripts, and create them early enough that you can adapt them for various formats. So the same script that you might do in Zoom worship, then take out all of the technical stuff and then create it as a devotional to send to folks. Increase your focus on music appreciation. You know, I've already kind of talked about that already, but install your Advent Christmas visuals anyway in your church, even if you're not going to be in your sanctuary. Do it, of course, safely distanced, all the protocols, masks, gloves, not too many people in there setting it up, but set it up and then do a video photo shoot of it. So you have tons of footage, tons of images to use in your online worship, to use in that pre-recorded or Zoom worship. Hopefully you're doing video editing of pieces with photos and video clips and things anyway, even if you're doing Zoom Live, because you can go to your computer and show a video just like I just did. And it's a great way to get more participation because you're getting people to read scripture, you're getting people to even sing, that kind of thing. Learn to edit video. It sounds like many of you have already begun that process. It is not hard. You certainly can get super complicated about it, but you don't have to. As soon as you learn a few very basic things, you can actually do it. And it doesn't all have to fall on the pastor. Find somebody who'd like to, find some kid in high school who is taking a computer course and get them to learn, spread out the tasks and it's a great way to connect with people who are not in your community. I'll have a music example here in just a moment. You can do this for free too. There are programs that are free. Many of you are using iMovie. So it doesn't have to be expensive. And boy, the payoff is really great. Search your audio archives for past Advent Christmas hymns. So if you have been recording your worship to send to Homebound or videoing it, you have some archives. See if you can go back to last year or years before. Find some of the classic Christmas, Advent and Christmas songs. Pull that audio, right? You just use the audio and then put some beautiful pictures on top of it. Let people sing along with themselves, with their past selves. And use public domain repertoire so that you can use already recorded things and not be worrying about getting a streaming license for that. Of course, you need permission if you're using somebody else who's singing. But public domain, and thankfully Advent Christmas is full of a lot of public domain choices. So that's a really good thing. It'll give you a break from dealing with all of the permissions for a little bit. Create a relationship with area youth and music teachers to collaborate on perhaps some virtual choirs. And I'm going to show you where you can get a lot of great instruction on that if you haven't tried that already. So create these connections with people who might not be part of your church community, but how wonderful for them to have a project to work with you on that. So offer worship alternatives to Sunday morning that take the pressure off of Sunday morning to do it all. And I already in the chat, I saw that many of you are doing that with daily emails and perhaps weekly prayer kinds of things. We created this Park Porch and Sidewalk Sings material. It's free downloadable resources to take caroling to the next level this year. What do you do when you can't safely sing inside? You take it outside, right? You take it out, you safely distance. We've created a leader guide that with pictures to show you, how safely distanced caroling can happen. We've created karaoke tracks that go with it. So you don't even have to have your own musicians along. You can just play the karaoke tracks on a Bluetooth kind of stereo. This is the end of the day, friends. This is my third webinar. I'm going to forget some words. This is where in a live workshop, I would be like doing, I can't even remember the name of the game, and you all would be like telling me. So anyway, karaoke tracks. But we also have ideas for percussion and ideas for different instrumentation and handbells for that caroling. We have a 30-minute set that you do stationary. So you find a park or your church property, and you big enough to safely distance your choir. And we have a 30-minute set. It has narration, and it has some fun and poignant COVID carol verses to go with the tunes of beloved carols. So I highly recommend you look at that. You can go to worshipdesignstudio.com/carol2020 to get that and download that. So pilgrimage worship with no touch stations. I'm really big into stational worship and having people go and do things at station, like writing prayers down, dissolving paper in water to let go, all this symbolic ritual action. Well, I still want you to consider doing stations that tell the Christmas story, the narrative, but it's going to have to be no touch, right? But we can do it, and I've created some things for that. So let me talk about that. So interactive and out of the box ideas. Now, labyrinths or stations on Christmas Eve on your church property, if you have the space to do that. And if you're using luminaries, line the space with luminaries, the path with luminaries. Here is a picture of a church that every year goes out and gets greenery and creates a labyrinth in their churchyard for the community to walk. You would have to have some protocols in place so that you don't have too many people walking that labyrinth at a time. But just imagine you can use either pine boughs like they're doing here, or these luminaries that people would decorate. So a labyrinth or a kind of path. A path might be a better idea than a labyrinth right now, because you wouldn't pass people. Eat more easily, safer. You can also do a creche collection. I have my nativity set that I have had since I was a kid, and I'm sure a lot of people do. And so one of the ideas that I had come up with years ago, which is on this slide, that you wouldn't want to do, is to create a sort of museum exhibit for people to come through inside. But you could invite people to take photos of their nativity sets, or even videos. Here's a video of a nativity set, and you could splice that together in a wonderful piece with some music and add that, and then people would get to see each other's nativity sets as well. So, whatever idea you have had in the past, how can you adapt that for online that would still create something beautiful? Even if you are doing an adapted in-person worship, and I don't think many of us in California are, but as I teach others around the country, there are some places who are doing adapted in-person worship. And I keep telling them, even when we go back with a few people in there, we're still going to want to use our projected video packages that we are creating, so that we can include people who are too vulnerable to come out when some restrictions are lifted, We still want to see them reading scripture. We still want them to, to feel like they are with us. So we're going to continue to be making these video packages for a long time to come, I think. And actually, it's a skill we're going to use into the future. I think we're learning things right now that eventually we would have learned anyway. We just were forced into it. We were accelerated into learning these things. And as long as we treat it as an art form, right, that helps to tell the story, then we will do good work. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to connect. So a living Advent wreath, I also have in the worship design studio as part of the Christmas Eve ideas that go with our I Believe Even When series. I have an idea of 4 stations. That's the love, hope, love, joy, and peace stations that you could create a huge wreath out in the yard. Now, this idea that you're seeing on the screen right now is, again, for pre-COVID times. Somebody called it BC, before COVID, so BC times. But take the same idea and take it outside. And I've written descriptions of the different kind of stations you could create. One of the things that we used to do, speaking of Truckee, when I lived there, I would go and help out at the UCC church in Squaw Valley on Christmas Eve, which of course would have hundreds of people showing up because they were there on vacation, Christmas vacation. And we would just have a ton of costumes to hand any kid who came in the door, because of course with all these guests, you're not going to have rehearsals. So that's why I call it Night at the Improv. And then we would just hand out, a shepherd's little costume, whatever, all the costumes. And then we would just read the Christmas story and we say, okay, all the shepherds come on up, when it was time. And so it was kind of an improv, kind of an informal kind of thing. I want to say you could still do that in Zoom worship. You could prompt families beforehand to have some common objects so the kids could play all the characters, right? So you would figure out, okay, we have a broom on hand for the shepherd staff. Get a baby doll, get your kid's baby doll ready to be Jesus, right? So create a list of things and do kind of a story and say, okay, now go get your broom. Okay, now go get the baby, all these kinds of things. I haven't written that out. You could do it. You could figure it out on your own, but I think that would be a really fun way to have a family service. Also want to say, I just did an interview today with Mark Burrows, who creates our children's materials, and he has created a puppet play that is just so precious and so poignant this year. And anyway, that's available. So that's my list of things around some of the things I've been considering. Learning simple video editing techniques, that is a must do if you haven't started to do that, or you haven't encouraged or supported someone in doing that. Because really, I've been teaching Worship Design Studio subscribers these simple techniques. And once you people are having fun with it. There are some people like, I'm having so much fun doing this, right? Other people are totally stressed out about it, depending on, how much you like to create and learn new things. We all have different levels of comfort with that. But really, once you get a few techniques and understand the way it works, it's really a quite creative thing to do. My favorite resources, unsplash.com, free photos, permission-free photos, royalty-free photos. Beautiful collection. Also, pexels.com. They have photos, but also that's where I get my video clips to put together video things. And it's quite a large collection. So it is just a fantastic, these are the 2 most fantastic resources that have gotten me through. I created an entire worship series for this summer based on a theology of beauty as the ground of our desiring good things for all beings, right? And so I created videos for worship for 6 weeks for my subscribers, and you can get all of these a la carte. But just an amazing storehouse of videos and photos to help put together just about anything. But do your own too. Our phones, our camera phones are amazing. So here is just some photo from my photo shoot that I did when I took the San Francisco Theological Seminary chapel that you saw in that series trailer. And then I started playing with these luminaries and some poinsettias. And I started to take pictures. So set things up, take some photos. They can be used as background. Get B-roll. This is the filmmaker's terminology for video clips without any sound on them that you can then use wherever in your video editing. So this is my video clip, and it's not slowed down, but I do it pretty fast to begin with because then I can slow it down in post-production in the video editing program. But it gives me something that I could put behind, say, a scripture, behind a piece of music. So that's just a very cursory look at what you might do. Now, I purposely did this at night, put some of those poinsettias in so I would get some silhouettes, because I'm going to create templates for backgrounds, for songs, and for different things. And so when you start to think this way, you start to take pictures where part of the picture has a big dark spot so that you can put those white words on a dark background, which is the most friendly way to put words on an image. That's the easiest way to see the words. And so you start to think about, you start to get that. And then it saves time because you start to have certain backgrounds you can use every time we do that opening Advent carol or that carol of resistance. Okay, I told you I was going to tell you about virtual choirs. I just co-sponsored with the Practical Resource Center, Practical Resources for Churches organization, an 11 webinar series on every step of doing virtual choirs. From the inspiration at the beginning, why we do it, creating connection through song, to getting started, what programs should you look at? How do you prepare lead tracks? How do you tell your choir? How do you instruct them about creating these? And then we went into particular programs and did tutorials. So you can have access to this at worshipdesignstudio.com/virtual choir. If you are not a Worship Design Studio subscriber, or if you haven't purchased the I Believe Even When Advent series, then we ask for a $10 donation for countless hours of. Now I've created an overview of what's in all of these that's in the Worship Design Studio that you can take a look at so you don't get overwhelmed by that many hours of things. I'll give Reggie that link so that you can look at it. So I would just want to play this before we go to some questions. I want to play a virtual choir piece. And I want to do it because this particular one was made by a 14-year-old. All right. It's not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. But my point is that you don't have to be perfect. We've all seen these really slick, amazing, perfect, huge virtual choir videos. And some of us think, I could never do that. That would take a cajillion hours, and it does. But you don't have to spend a cajillion hours. You can create something that creates connection without spending a lot of hours learning every bell and whistle, because what we want is we want that connection. So let's take a look at this. Jalo means always.
Always we pray, always we give, always be blessed, always we pray, always we give, always be blessed, always
so that's a song in Zulu, Jalo. And, it's so important to find ways to connect. And that was one way to do that, to include lots of people, to use a song that's easy, that has some motions to it, and motions transcend language, right? So it helps to connect us in ways that we communicate in the same language. And, actually, because I've done lots of international conferences like General Conference, I know that the video editing, the video production has been my friend in those cases where I wanted several languages to be represented. And so it actually helps us. It's something that actually is easier when we're using a medium where we can put lots of things together, and we can have subtitles of one language while we hear another language and then switch it up. Oftentimes at General Conference, well, every worship service at General Conference, I would have a prayer of invocation. I would ask someone to pray that the Holy Spirit move in us in that time in their language and no translation. Because as long as we know what that prayer intention is, it doesn't matter if we cognitively understand that. There are pieces of the liturgy that we can do that with. And so we don't always have to translate everything in a multicultural situation when we couch it and we repeat it and we know the intention that is behind it. The words of institution, for example, pieces of liturgy that we hear over and over and over again. And we can love it for the rhythm of that language, right? We can, even if we don't cognitively understand it, we can love the expression of that language itself on its own. All right, friends. Woo! Okay. I know there's been a lot of chat going on. I'm really happy about that. Reg, tell me.
Hi, good morning. I don't. You have so much energy. I love it. I love it. And the I can see how this is a ministry to you. So I really appreciate it. I want to see. I didn't see any questions that came up in the chat. As you know, if you have some questions, why don't you put them in the chat, and I'll be looking for them.
Yeah.
Marcia has agreed to stay on a little bit afterwards. So, we'll have the open mic from 5 to 5:20, 5:30 around there. So if you have questions, we can bring you on directly and you can raise your hand and we'll take care of that. Um, I want to also find out, well, I see this question coming up. After 6 months of this, what is the ideal length of the online service? It's a great question. Thank you, Kim.
Great question. I'm finding that 45 minutes is a great length. And the truth is that because we don't have the transitions of getting up and down, and I mean, especially pre-recorded, that flow can just happen. Right now, Zoom is a little bit tougher on those transitions. You have to figure out how to be concise, how to have those good transitions. You have to practice that, right? Yesterday, I think it was yesterday in the Reboot webinar, we talked about part of being able to lead in a deeply spiritual way is to do some very technical things, like practice the technical aspects so that in the moment we can be truly present as leaders. But I think that's also true of those who are watching. And so we also talked about how do we prepare people to, especially they're in their homes, they're in a familiar surrounding. I teach about something called the threshold moment, and that is the beginning of worship, that we start with something that draws us in. When I was studying and interviewing filmmakers, I asked them what they thought was the most important moment for drawing us into a story. And they said the first 2 minutes are absolutely crucial, because that's the moment at which people either lean in and they go on the journey with you, or they lean back and they remain observers, which allows every other distraction to be going on, right? So I know I can't see y'all, but I know some of y'all are multitasking. It's starting to be dinner time. That's the nature of all these Zoom meetings. So not only we're using this platform for worship, but we're also in our business, we're doing that. Where there's so the medium itself is not unique. We're not going into a space, a sacred space that is designated, that right away focuses us in a different way. So we have to do that very carefully in the way that we begin worship. And that's why I teach a threshold moment where we draw people into the story. It's why I think it's super important to keep people in 3D. So, in other words, in our bodies, because we're looking at a flat screen, we can kind of become, I don't know, there's this Zoom gloom that happens, right? We get detached from our bodies. And so as much as possible, asking people to light a candle at a specific moment, asking them to, for instance, I did a series called Heart of the Matter at the very beginning of this pandemic for Easter season. And I had people, there was a ritual action where people had our stone, a worry stone, right? And we had people put hearts on them so that they could pick up that worry stone, and we could have a prayer time that talked about the worries that we had, right? Something tangible. That's why inviting people in the Advent Christmas series that I've developed, asking them to create luminaries that they can turn on and create, surround themselves with some sacred boundaries, right? Create a sacred space. And especially if you have kids, you want them to, go turn on the little battery tea lights in the luminary so we can get ready for worship. Have a yoga mat where the kids can sit. That's their place where they sit for worship. And you only do that for worship, right? What are the ways that we can create sacred space and time, even when people are in their ordinary places? So I went way beyond how long, but it's also how do we keep people engaged, right? So it's not just about the time element, although that's important, but it's also about how do we engage people in a way that time passes and service is over before they know it. That's when you know that worship has you've gone on the journey because you're not aware of time. Here's another thing the filmmakers said to me that was absolutely fascinating. Transitions are so important because, so they're talking about transitions between scenes and things, but our transitions, the metaphor is our transitions between pieces of the service are so important because what they said is that as soon as people become aware of the mechanics of something, you have taken them out of the story, you've taken them out of the journey. And so we work extra hard to create these smooth transitions. And it's difficult in Zoom, right? Very difficult, but practicing that, having somebody besides the leader actually sharing the screen when it's time so that the leader can keep that sense of, we're going to talk about this next week in Reboot, the leader can continue to speak, which creates that continuity, right? As somebody is moving to share the screen, if you've got one of those kinds of transitions. And you don't have to stop as a leader and just go, okay, right? So, these are some of the things that I've been rolling around.
Marcia, let me ask you a question first. Let me let everyone know that I put the link in the chat. You can still register. They're just pre-recorded sessions. So please, if you're interested in this, register and get some of the goodness that's coming out. And if you're interested, we're thinking about doing one for the Lenten season also. And if this is something that's interesting to you, just put it in the chat. Let me know. Then we can do a similar thing, make it free for everyone in the conference. I'll work with Marcia to get that done. And then you can sign up and get some ideas about Lent and Easter. It's the Easter season also. So let me know.
Watching the recording, maybe sending out this recording to folks who weren't able to come on with that link so that people can jump onto Reboot. Because friends, there's tons of resources there. Let me give you an example. On week 3, when you go to that content session, I always put the timeline in the YouTube description as well as there in Worship Design Studio. So if you have visual artists that want some ideas, take them right to week 3. There is a recording there just for visual artists that they can watch. And you can go right in the timeline to that place where I gave my top tips for visual arts. So, you don't have to watch the whole thing. You can jump around. And that link, and I don't know, Reggie might not know this, but that link is available in perpetuity. So, you have access to that.
Right. So it's available. I have a couple of more questions. I know it's 5 o'clock and I know some people have to leave, but a couple of more questions came up. One of the questions are chats and messaging encouraged for worship? If so, are there some concerns about security? And have you found any issues regarding that? And before you answer that, Marcia, the recording for all of these webinars, the recording is available. It's available on our website. We'll make sure that the link to the Reboot Your Worship is included in that again. Look at the instant connection. And we're not going to send it out to all the staff, but you can share it with all the staff because we purchased it for all the members in the annual conference. So please take advantage.
Get on it, but you can send that link to anybody in your church that might be interested, and they can get on it. I am going to say, don't put that link on your website because other conference, that's available to the world.
But, right, and it's not.
But maybe send that out again to folks and remind them. So
the question about security, Paul asked the question, are chats and messaging encouraged? And if so, are there concerns about security? Have you found any issues with safety? Great question, Paul. Thank you.
And maybe Paul, I might want to ask you a little bit more about what kinds of safety issues. So I have not found, people are using chat in YouTube live stream. They're using chat in Facebook Live. They're using chat in Zoom. We had that really awful period where hackers were getting into Zoom, and Zoom finally figured out how to make it more safe. And so that was happening for a while, but people have not seen that for a long time, unless, there's some people on this webinar who had a different experience. But I've been using Zoom almost every day and having webinars with hundreds of people and have not had a problem. I think that people self-monitor, and you might encourage your folks, think about what you put in chat, personal information, don't divulge that your house is going to be empty for the next month, stuff like that. You gotta take care of yourself and just be aware. But I have not heard any horror stories about safety when using messaging and chat. I don't know if anybody else does. You can put in the chat if you have been thinking about it. But the safety of Zoom was a little dicey there for a moment, and safety meaning there were people getting in and putting up, pictures of things we didn't want to see, just kind of doing that. But that Zoom really stepped up, and they should, because they are making a ton of money right now. So they should be spending money on safety right now. So I haven't had any problems.
All right. So Paul, thank you. It was a great question. It's a great question. He said there haven't been any issues, but they had one instance outside of his ministry. So I understand that. Sure.
And I think that it's interesting how we get used to different forms of intimacy. I was worshiping with a church where I have a dear friend who's the pastor this last Sunday on Zoom. and not on Zoom, on Facebook Live. And you know, people were using the chat for prayer concerns, and you know, my stepmother is going through a very difficult time, got a very difficult diagnosis, and so putting that concern during prayer time in chat, and then having somebody from their staff just say, Marcia, I'm so sorry, and we're praying for you and your family. And like, I'm still getting choked up thinking about it. So, you know, what we used to think might be impersonal, we get very used to that sense of connection in different ways. And so a lot of people are finding it, that it personalizes the experience, even if you can't have, you know, a lot of people on the screen. And some people are finding that being able to have anonymity, so not be on screen, but be able to communicate. I am guaranteeing you there's some people putting some prayer concerns that would never speak that aloud in church, right? So some people, this is like an introvert's heaven here, what we got going on in some ways. Yeah, there are people who are missing. Now, let me say something about that. There are some people who are missing their sanctuaries so much, and community so much, that it becomes a pastoral care concern. I had a friend who's a pastor at a fairly large United Methodist church in Southern California, and she was telling me that, you know, one of their folks lost, you know, his spouse, you know, within the year, and was just missing the sanctuary so very much. And so what she did was arranged for someone to bring him in a safe manner, right, to the church, and there's nobody in there, and he was able to come sit in his pew for a little bit and just soak in that sanctuary. And it made all the difference, made all the difference to that person. So if there are people with acute, you know, depression and something, you know, how can we help bring their sacred spaces to them? Now, one way is like what I'm doing right now, right? Green screen with the sanctuary. And one of the reasons why I'm saying for Advent Christmas especially, decorate that sanctuary the way that you do, and take videos and photos and help us to feel like we're there. Maybe in your threshold moment, the beginning of your worship, you do B-roll, you take video of an acolyte coming in and lighting a candle, and so that people feel that sense of being there. Our brains, you know, we see that image and it calls up the feeling of what it feels like to be in that space. So really use that as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you. We're going to hang on for a little bit, have open mic. So if you guys would hang with me for a little bit, we'll bring you up live in case you have questions for Dr. Marcia McFee. We are so grateful for you, Dr. McPhee, for your energy, for your ministry. We are thankful. If some have to leave, don't forget, look at the instant connection for registration for our webinar next week, which will be Walking While Black Love is the Answer. We should have a movie link for you to see that. And the week after, we will be talking about voting the day after. How do you affirm your voice and at the same time care for others? And how do you care, especially the day after the election, which this year is going to be a wonderful opportunity to show God's love and God's grace, regardless of how elections come out. So make sure you get the instant connection. We're going to open the mics now. And
Before
sure.
some people go off, I've been talking about the Advent Christmas series that Mark Miller and I put together. I put the link in the chat, worshipdesignstudio.com/believe. You can find out more there. And I want to draw your attention where the price is. I put something there that says, if you are experiencing financial hardship in your congregation, just email me. We're giving 50% rebates on the a la carte price because we don't want that to stand in the way. So really take that seriously and consider if you want some help with Advent Christmas, this series will give you instantly
Wow.
things that you can do and put in place and get ready for a really amazing experience.
Wow. So I see it in the chat. It's worshipdesignstudio.com/believe or /believe.
Mhm.
So catch that and thank you, Marcia, for making that available. We're going to open up the lines now and have some open mic. So if you have some questions, all you do is raise your hand. We'll get you and you'll get live if you want to give Marcia a virtual high five. That can happen too. We will allow that. So, um, yeah. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. We'll be looking for questions. I see Paul raised your hand. So Tua is with me and he is great. So I'm going to allow Paul, I'm going to allow you to talk. Come on, unmute your mic. And yeah, Paul,
Yeah.
welcome.
Hey, I don't want to take all the time. I like the fact that you have this what do you call it, interaction. But I did have a thought. You know, when we started doing all the quick change to technology, you know, there was probably a lot of forgiveness that was happening in the eyes of our viewers and such, because we didn't know what we were doing. But then we quickly learned, and then, you know, and at the beginning, everybody was just like, you know, just gracious that we had something. But then after a while, then comes the criticisms, and then we, you know, then all of a sudden we had to sharpen our saw quickly, and which we did. So I kind of wonder, because and it's just probably a philosophical view that you might have, but you know, there are a lot of things that do come out, like your choir piece that I thought was just great. And no, it's not, you know, maybe the most you know, professional looking, yeah, but is there, and maybe with the Methodist Church especially, is there kind of like a balance in terms of, yes, we want to strive for excellence, but you know, I don't want to ever like discourage art, you know, like say, for example, like our youth, because that's what it was used there.
Yeah.
So I just kind of wondered your thoughts on that, and in terms of making that balance right and representing the church well.
Yeah.
Great question, Paul. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great question. And, you know, and actually, I mean, it is kind of exacerbated because we're all, you know, learning new techniques. But it's true in non-COVID times as well. This balance between wanting to include people and knowing that, you know, we're going to have a difference in quality of certain things, right? So my belief is that worship is not a spectator sport, and participation happens in many ways. And so we want to have, sometimes we want to have that participation in leadership, even if somebody is not the perfect reader, the greatest orator or the greatest singer. You know, I grew up in this tiny little United Methodist Church in Adrian, Missouri, and we had this one woman who wanted to sing a solo every year. You know, we all kind of cringed through it, but there was no way we were going to say no, because, you know, this was the ethos of the place, is that you want to, if that feels like the way that you're going to give glory to God, who's going to stand in the way of that, right? So it's this culture of generosity and hospitality. But there's also the truth that we want to offer things that draw people in without distraction, right? So we're going to make some decisions sometimes. Okay, so we don't have the greatest video editing techniques or skills or time for virtual choir. So we're going to do that a minimum of time so we can spend some time doing that, right? And otherwise, we're going to use music, and we're going to overlay some beautiful video clips that we have put on top of a choir singing something. Maybe it's from our archives. Maybe it's a hymn that's public domain that we were able to do. So we're going to make decisions about how we can draw people in, have something that's quality enough that it doesn't distract us from the message, right? But also have this culture of hospitality and generosity that says, all God's children got a place in the choir, right? And this is what makes us community. This is what makes us us. And so it is kind of a balancing act. I hope that answers your question. It is a philosophical kind of thing. And not everybody's going to agree with me. Some people are going to say we give God our best, and the best has to be this certain level. And you are absolutely right that at the beginning, people are like, whatever, oh my gosh, the church is reaching out to me. Okay, it's a little wonky, but oh my gosh, I'm so grateful. And then time passes. and here's what I think has happened. And pastors who are on, I know that you become a hotspot for people's inability to control anything right now. So they try to control what they can control, and that is giving you their opinion about what you ought to be doing with the only thing that they interact with, which is worship, right? So people are in control mode because they feel so out of control. And this is a real deal. And I think this part of it is saying out loud to folks, reminding them that this is, Brene Brown in her podcast. I don't know if you heard her first podcast, but she called it, I'm not going to say it. She called it FFTs. I'll call it a freaking first time. She used a different word, but we're all in the middle of FFTs every day because we're having to navigate this. And to keep reminding folks in whatever way you can that, we're so grateful that you all are engaging with us, and we are trying our best. And this takes, a lot of people don't have any idea what it takes to put this together. They don't have any idea that you're learning new skills. And again, even when they do, they're trying to control something in their lives. And so that's often when we get the criticism, is when people, opinions, they feel like if they can express an opinion, it's a way to control a situation. It's that, which is false, of course, and we have no control. But when we need control, we kind of grab at the things that we can grab. And that's often true, as a consultant for churches for over 25 years, I'm often called in when there's conflict about worship. And what I almost always find out is it's not really about worship. It's about something much deeper that they haven't dealt with. But worship is the easier thing to fight about than really getting down to the deep level of hurt or grief or unfinished business or whatever it is.
Right.
Yeah.
That's a great question. Paul. And I think it gets at some of the deeper issues. I like what you said, Marcia, about control in this uncontrollable space.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you give a voice and keep excellence?
Mm-hmm.
And even that is a balancing, it's a juggling act,
Yeah.
because you want to open it up at the same time. You want to make sure that the brand, if you will, is solid in an unsolid time, right?
Yeah. And we can all get better, and we should be getting better. I mean,
right.
we are in this long enough,
Right.
and that's why it's interesting. The first webinar I did about how to do worship online was the very first week after we had to be online. I had over 1,000 people come on that webinar because we were at square one. Oh my gosh, how do I do this, right? And now this fall, I have another surge of people requesting webinars and that kind of thing. Another surge of people, because we got ourselves through the summer and now we see Advent Christmas coming and we're starting to panic. How can I do something that feels special and feels good? And that's why I'm just I'm working really hard to create these resources that people can use, because I know worship is not the only thing you have to do in your life and your ministry, right? And so my job is the worship piece. So I just want to resource people so much and also help you train other people to help you. So you're not doing it all, because you cannot sustain this on your own.
Well, Marcia, I appreciate this. And again, if this is something that you want to see for the Lenten Easter season, I got a couple of responses. Let me know, because I think it's so valuable, and the resources that you've provided through your work have been absolutely excellent, creative, um, not a heavy lift, or giving a variety of lifting options, right? So, and I appreciate that. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah.
And beautiful. I love the song. I'm going to go singing always now, but that's all. Well, any other questions that have come up? I don't see any other. Uh, oh, it's good. I see one. Ann, you're saying that your church is a
Oh,
subscriber. Oh, that's great. That's great. That's great. And on your website, tell us a little bit more in closing.
yeah.
Some final remarks, Marcia. In closing.
Yeah. So let me just, just in the last few minutes, let me just give you a whirl here. You can be a free member of Worship Design Studio. There's a lot of free materials in here. So, you'd be in here and you just put in the search bar free, and you're going to find articles, different things. There's that free series I did, Heart of the Matter, for when at the beginning of the pandemic. I have, for my book, Think Like a Filmmaker, I have a free guide that has, it's basically a curriculum. And so there's a lot of free things in there. But as a subscriber, then you have access to all of my 12 years worth of series. And so let me show you the worship series library if you're a subscriber. And a subscription, it if you do the math, it comes out to about one specialty latte per week to get a year's full of materials. But we have series for all the liturgical seasons, every cycle of the Revised Common Lectionary, and 2 cycles of the Narrative Lectionary. Some of them are what I call fully scripted series. So that's where I put together everything and then you adapt it for your context. But for our subscribers, I also have lots of what we call DIY series, where I have created the series, all the descriptions of every week, and then I just fill pages and pages worth of ideas that you could do, more ideas than you can do. And then you put it together in an order of worship in a script. And so you can see that's just a ton. And I continue to create. I will tell you that if you decide to become a Worship Design Studio subscriber right now, then you would get the Advent series now. I'm creating another one for Epiphany and the Sundays after, that's going to be called God is Holding Your Life. And it will have a video package of a song that goes with a psalm every week. It's a very simple thing, because I really think that the first of the year after Advent Christmas, we're going to need to go simple. I am just suggesting that we go almost morning prayer kind of simple. And so I'm creating that. And then I'm creating for Lent. And right now I have a seed of an idea about what I'm doing for my series for Lent. You'll be second to know behind my Reboot folks, or my planning retreat folks I talked to today. But I'm thinking about a series that highlights churches as a place of healing and wholeness and recovery from the toxicity of the last year. So what would it look like to have a Lenten journey of recovery, a Lenten season of recovery, where we focus on our spiritual health, which of course is tied to our physical health, our mental health, our economic health, our environmental health, and that we would focus on that. So that's what I'm beginning to work on for Lent. But of course, as a Worship Design Studio subscriber, you get access to everything from every year. So a lot of people use different things. So Anne can attest to that. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for having me on. Good to
Thank
see
you.
folks.
Thank you.
Good to
Thank
see
you.
my Cal Nevada UMC folks. I'm keeping you in my heart and my prayers. And I am here to resource you. I am just focused on you and helping you through this time.
Amen. Amen. Well, thanks again, Marcia, for being with us. I'll talk with you about some next opportunities. Thank you all for hanging with us during this a wonderful Wednesday webinar. Please check our Instant Connection coming out Thursday. Thank you, Tua and Selby, for your work behind the scenes in getting things done. And we'll see you next week, next Wednesday. God bless you. Bye bye now.
Bye.